Parrottsville, Tennessee, conducted by Dr. Charles W. Johnson of the Department of History, University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Interview conducted November 16th, 1986. I was thinking about my conversation with you before and the letters that I read and the rest of it. I was wondering if today we could talk about the war years, and then some other time we might talk about the years before the war and after the war. Because I'm very interested in a lot of things about you, but I want to focus today on the years of the war, if I could.
All right.
You were, from what you told me, you were older than they would let you in the Navy.
That is right.
And so the Merchant Marine was, Merchant Service.
When I was sure we were going to get into the war was already going, but we weren't in it. America wasn't in it. I went to the Naval Reserve, and the Navy wasn't recruiting, or at least not making any noise about it. And he said, no. He said, if you're a reasonably good machinist, go ahead and be a good machinist. And so that satisfied me until we declared war. I got that. Yes, I received that information while I was in my automobile going home. I got it over the thing.
That's one of the markers that almost everybody has who's old enough to remember it. They remember where they were and what they were doing when they heard about Pearl Harbor. It's, for people my age, I have this vague memory of it. I was 7, perhaps, in 1941.
Oh, yeah.
But I remember, and all of my people remember, where they were when John F. Kennedy was killed. Where were you when you heard that? That's the marker for our people.
No, I didn't. I don't remember when he was killed. I do remember when whoever it was wanted to shut up the boy who did the killing.
Oh, Jack Ruby.
Yeah, he was shot.
Yes, that was the Sunday morning afterwards.
And it was a little embarrassing because we walked into somebody's house we didn't know on business, and it was their private house, and their daughter had the TV on, and we started talking to her mother, and the daughter kept screaming, "But he shot him! He's shooting him!" She watching the whole thing on TV. But that's all I remember about it.
Yeah. But World War II was, Pearl Harbor was a different kind of marker for you.
Yes, definitely. Then I went home and told Judy that...
Home was in New Jersey?
Yes.
Yeah.
This was in New Jersey. We lived there for about 30 years. And done a great deal in theater, amateur theater. Jeannie, surprisingly enough, directed.
I remember Joanne told me that you met while she was directing a play.
Yeah. Oh, she shocked people terribly.
Oh?
She walked onto a set once when 2 boys were papering a set. And it was a figured paper. And she walked over to it and examined it. And she turned to the boys and said, "Aren't you putting this on upside down?" And one of the boys got up rather annoyed and looked at it closely and turned to his friend and said, "Do you know that 2 college boys with with 20/20 vision have just been told by a blind woman that we're putting the paper on upside down, and she's right. And she was. They were putting it on upside down. But it was a shock to them. That's
Yes,
all.
indeed.
And another one bowled everybody over. A man was sitting on stage. He had a line to speak, and Gene told him, after you have spoken your line, cross your legs. So they went to work, and the boy crossed his legs and said his line. And Gene said, no, I told you to make your statement and then cross your legs. And said she was totally blind. He said, how the hell did you know? And of course, she said, it takes effort to cross your legs. I could hear that effort in your line. And we don't want the audience to hear it, and so she explained the whole situation. But she was always doing things like that. People absolutely amazed her. She directed some of the best plays they put on, and they put up some damn good ones.
They being what organization or what group or?
Mountain Lakes Dramatic Guild.
Oh.
Originally, the plays were given in a movie house, and then they got an old barn and outgrew the barn. It was just too small to hold the scenery, and the stage was awfully small, my lord. They built their own building, and they still have it.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's quite an impressive place, except they built it backwards. Funny how they do that. Nobody noticed it. Let's see, how did they get, oh yes. The roof sloped from the back of the auditorium up and over the stage,
Mm-hmm.
which is exactly backwards.
It needs to
That's right.
fan out over the audience
And
rather
he had
than.
trouble, always had trouble with enunciation and hearing, projecting. You really had to put it out. And during that, an interesting thing, we had a show in which I took a part that amazed me. And they cut a hole in the floor, and all the lights were on stage, but the audience knew that they were supposed to be out.
Mm-hmm.
And when the lights actually went out, and they were supposed to be on, while the lights were on, but supposed to be out, part of my lines was to step into a hole in the floor and completely disappear. I don't know whether you've ever done anything like that,
No.
but it's impossible to walk into it. You've got to jump, because if you don't, you've got one leg left out.
Uh-huh.
If you step into it, this one's going down, but this one's stuck here. What are you going to do with it? So the only thing you can do is make a slight jump,
Uh-huh.
which I did after practicing by myself for some time. It was only a 2.5 or 3 foot hole, and I had a cane, and I had sense enough to dispose of the cane before jumping. Or as I jumped, I threw the cane to one side. And we had all kinds of cushions and beds for me to land on. But it was something I wouldn't want to do it again.
Mm-hmm. I can understand.
And then Jean took a part in Night Must Fall. No, The Dark of the Moon. You know, that had, that's played all over here.
Uh-huh.
The Dark of the Moon. She was the conjure woman. And said her parts, and they had a scrim across the back. They cut a hole in the scrim for her to get out of, because her trouble was we could get her on stage easily. Just head her in the right direction and she would go. But getting her off was something else again. So they cut a hole in the scrim, and I could stand behind the scrim and just whisper.
Talk her off.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am, Jim. Here I am. Here I am.
Uh-huh.
She'd walk off. And that worked out very well. 99% of the strange people that showed up had no idea she couldn't see.
Mm-hmm.
But that,
Very remarkable lady.
yeah. Yes, she is that.
You were married in 42?
Must have been.
It was after the war started.
No.
Was it? Or before the
no.
war?
2 years before.
Oh, before the war.
Yes,
So it would have been 1940 or so.
that's right. Because I know we'd just been married 2 years when I left.
Mm-hmm. And you left in 1942. That, okay.
Yeah. And there I didn't try the Navy again because I knew that I was too old,
Mm-hmm.
and figuring I couldn't fool anybody by lying about it.
You were born what year?
1903.
1903.
So I having all my papers for having been in the Merchant Marine for 2 or 3 years before I married,
Uh-huh.
I showed them, and the Merchant Marine, of course, was advertising and yelling for people to come.
Yeah, desperately needed people.
That's right. And especially officers. So I said, okay, I would become an officer. And they sent me up to New London,
Mm-hmm.
where they had a large school. And that's where that lovely, very embarrassing tragedy happened when I stole
With your silverware?
the silverware and dumped it on the iron fire escape when everybody was there. There wasn't a man missing.
Except you, for the moment.
That's right. Well, I was halfway there. I was going there.
Uh-huh.
But the rest of them were all lined up, all waiting. Oh yeah, that nearly brought the house down.
And the officer said what?
The officer said, a little short of silver at home, Bob. And I said, souvenirs, sir. And got in line. He said no more. The stuff was still stuffed back into my pocket, and I went home.
From the letters that I read, you were very busy when you were in the school. They were cramming a lot of information into a fairly short time.
Indeed, very, yes. And let's see. The only things I hated was that during winter was lining up in blistering weather to eat. And they lined you up outside and then opened the doors suddenly and let you in.
Uh-huh.
And they had a big enough dining room so that they'd take an entire building. that was very unpleasant. I got pneumonia, incidentally.
Oh.
Gene and I made arrangements to meet in New York and to spend 2 days, in other words, the weekend, just fooling around in New York. We were not going home to Gene's place. And we took a room in, can't think of the hotel, but it is attached to Grand Central Station.
Mm-hmm.
And
The mix something or other?
gosh, I can't think of it.
I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Jeannie wouldn't know. But at all events, when I woke up in the morning, I was non-conscious. I was shocked. I had pneumonia.
Hmm.
So I got a lucid moment. I told Jean, when that was after the doctor had come, a strange doctor who said, you can't go back, and so on. You're stuck. And I sent for the manager. And I said, tell Gene, tell him that we expected to stay here one night. And I have pneumonia. It doesn't look as though we can get away. But we can't stay here because we couldn't possibly afford to spend a week here.
Mm-hmm.
He was very nice and said, forget the whole business. You owe nothing.
Wonderful. At
Yeah.
a time when hotel rooms were worth their weight in gold
I know.
in New York.
Yeah. But he said, is there no place you can go here? And we decided that obviously the Red Cross ought to take care of me. And so we called the Red Cross, and they said no, they couldn't do a thing. And we called New London, and they said no, he's off base, we can't help him at all. And I forget who the last person we called for, but they got hold of the Red Cross hospital. Not on Long Island, but someplace off away. And they carried me, I remember, this great big hotel into a freight elevator, and then through more corridors and subterranean places that you wouldn't believe, obviously keeping me from being seen by the public. A corpse being taken out that I wouldn't stand for. And there was an ambulance waiting, and they took me and so on. That was the end of that. In due course, I recovered and went back and had missed a certain number of courses which they couldn't afford to count. So they passed all that, gave me a verbal exam, which was a little ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he just asked a few silly questions that any child could have answered, whether he'd had training or not, and said, okay, you're a third assistant engineer. And let me see, how did I get on? Oh yes, a friend said he worked for the South Pacific, no, South Atlantic Steamship Company. And I said, all right, I'll work for them. And I went and interviewed them, of course, and showed them my brand new thing, and they gave me a ticket onto an old turbine. It was one of the first boats that was made during the First World War. after we went to war, and there was a big hurry, and they were slapping them together, and they slapped this thing together. And it was a beauty. I loved it. It was called the SS Chickashinny.
Chickashinny?
Yes, it was made in Chickashinny, Pennsylvania.
Uh-huh.
And so that was it. I had a good engineer, chief engineer, fortunately. He was the one that, during the attack that I described, came and patted me on the shoulder and said, "Let's put our toys away, Bart, and go home."
Were you in the, I wondered from the letter, were you in the Mediterranean there or in the
Yes.
Atlantic? Yeah, I thought you were in the Mediterranean.
That's right. It always worked the same way. The German planes would come out of Africa and do their dirty work, and as soon as they were through, and going back here from South France or someplace, would come the American planes after the others had gone, and they'd fly around furiously for a while, and then they'd go home. So we always kept cursing that they couldn't come out on time to fight the Germans there, but I guess there was some reason for it.
Probably
all.
took too long to get them scrambled and up in the air and out.
Yes, they couldn't have been coming from the south of France because Germany had taken France at that time.
They must have been over in North Africa further west,
Something
over
like
somewhere.
that. But all events, they were always late. So we got along, and I think we went, no, not on that trip. On another trip, we went straight through we went south in the Atlantic and around the Horn and up the east side of Africa, and stopping both at Cape Town, and then Durban was our next thing. At Durban I had a lot of fun because I went to a hotel there, and a lady was handing out tea, and she turned out to be the wife of the manager, and she and I got along very well together. I think we got along a little better than I was willing to go through with,
Okay.
because one night only I spent the night in the hotel, and she was at pains to show me how close the room she gave me was to her room, and that her husband lived on a different floor. It seemed to me ever since that she expected to call her all that night. She didn't get it. But I remember being embarrassed by a husband when I was eating with them, and incidentally they ate all together. The higher colored servants sat with the white people and everybody, but we were served, of course, by black people. And her husband asked me, what did Americans think of Englishmen? And I said, in the first place, I couldn't possibly answer that question truthfully, because America was a big country, and I had no idea what people thought of English people in Texas or in Chicago or in New Orleans or in San Francisco or Seattle. It was just too much to answer. But I said, from the people I know, there's a general feeling of being afraid of Englishmen. especially being afraid of English men of their foreign policy outfit, that they could talk an American out of done nearly anything. And I said, I don't know whether they can or not, but that is the feeling. But we don't know how to handle English men of that type. And they have the most extraordinary frogs there. They sound just exactly like a creaking door. Like the old creaking doors they used to have in the movies.
Inner Sanctum Mysteries on
That's
the
right.
radio.
Yeah, it goes crack, crack as it opened. And that's just the way those damn frogs sounded. It fascinated me, and I never got a look at one. I tried to catch one or see what it looked like, but I never caught one. Then we went up to Mozambique. And there, American consul came aboard, and the crew was going together. And we were told that there were several German spies ashore for us, and that they mostly gathered in such and such a bar, and to stay clear of that. And even as he was talking, I thought, this guy must be an imbecile. Naturally, everybody went to that bar. They all wanted to meet a spy. They had no intentions of telling him the truth, of course. They were going to lie their heads off. But they wanted to meet a spy. I and another boy got a balcony. How we got that? Well, I guess it must have been for rent, at all events. But it was right across the street from one of these loaded bars. And we sat up there and had drinks from a bottle we'd bought, and watched the crew come and go from that particular bar. Oh dear. Then there was a bad mix-up there. They had done everything to bring drunks home to help us and so on, and there were drunks all the time. But one boy, apparently drunk, had started to fight, and they beat him unmercifully, and they practically carried him aboard and laid him down. And I was pretty mad at him, because he asked for it himself, and they were nice people, doing the best they could for us. And that was where, let me see, no, that was a different trip. Then we went up through the canal, where they had the bank almost lined, or every mile. They had a redoubt built of sandbags, and sticking out of it a great log of wood supposed to represent a gun. And that was all there was to protect us, these damn wooden guns sticking here. So, but there was no bombing.
The Germans didn't,
No.
or hadn't come through them?
Either that or they were scared of those bombs, those guns, I don't know.
Was that your first trip through the Suez Canal, or?
Yes. Yes. That was interesting. And then and then I learned a thing or two. Stopping at Port Said was horrible, because the dragomen each with a tray with funny jewelry on it. Useless stuff, but and they would get in your way, and they'd stand in front of you, and they'd walk slowly backwards in front of you. You couldn't get around them. If you stepped to one side, they stepped to one side. And you had to be as stubborn as I was to finally get rid of them. And I was talking about this to a Jewish boy who was on my watch and I knew well. And he said, listen, Bob, he said, you Christians, you just don't know how to handle people like that. He said, now you come up, boy, or you come ashore with me tomorrow. I said, I'd be very glad to. He said, I'll show you how to do it. And sure enough, the two of us walking up, we hadn't gone 50 feet, but there was a man in front of us with his tray and backing up and talking, whatever his language was. I couldn't understand it, but talked a mile a minute. And my Jewish friend started in on him and bawled the pants off him, yelled at him, got furiously angry, and finally bought the entire box and the sling, bought the whole thing from him, and walked. We didn't go more than 100 feet further, but he sold the whole box to somebody else's profit. I just couldn't do it, that's all.
Not your style, Bob.
Just no. It certainly wasn't. I couldn't do that, but I was amazed. He knew how to beat that man down until the man was terrified of him. Would do anything to get rid of him, and finally got rid of his whole tray. I always thought that was wonderful.
Do you, just wondering about it, do you, when you're thinking about I think you do, when you're thinking about the trips that you made, can you sort them out individually, or are they somewhat confused over the years that what happened on one trip, what happened on another?
Mostly I can sort out where we were, yes. Mm-hmm. That on one trip only we went up the Red Sea. No, not the Red Sea, but it was up the Euphrates River.
Oh.
And there were two things that struck me there. Both of them shocked me. Walking along a street, a truckload, an open truck of Russian soldiers came by. And I smiled and just gave them a sloppy salute. And I tell you, they looked right straight through me. There was no change of expression. Just, I wasn't there. Though heaven knows they'd seen me. Mm-hmm. But they were all young, and the only explanation I can think of is that there was a good communist aboard watching their behavior, and they were afraid to answer.
Probably so.
But gee, they were, I don't know, that shocked me. I knew that they were our partners in war then. But there's certainly no reaction. And then the other thing was, standing on the dock, it was a long dock, long enough for 2 or 3 boats to tie up to. We were tied up down at one end. I was walking up the dock, and there was a man there that he had a tin can, a small tin can, on the end of a piece of string, which he would let down and fill with water and drag it up and drink it. And not 15 or 20 feet upstream from him, there was a man urinating into the stream. That shocked me. I can't help it. My mouth dropped open. I looked at the two of them. I couldn't believe it. But there's nothing in their lives. And the only thing that I can think of is that that's the way they're born. And they built immunity to the
It's
disease.
survived over the years.
That's right. But it was rather disgusting to see.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And then I wrote you about the poor guy that jumped into the remains of an outhouse, didn't I?
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's a sad story. That
Mm.
he was the one who refused then in the next attack to get off the
That's right.
Jeep.
Yeah. Well, he stunk. Nobody wanted to be near him in the first place. And that was more than he could take. The Jeep that I was in was hit.
Mm-hmm.
While I was in it, I was burying my head in a ditch nearby.
Mm-hmm. Makes good sense to me.
But they had hung a whole bunch of tire chains on the front bumper. And that 20 millimeter shell smacked into that bunch of chains and exploded there, and it just raised hell with the chains, but didn't hurt the car at all. Didn't hit the Jeep. Then I remember being sick that night. Well, I was drinking red wine, and wine does not go well with Bob. So that I was sick, I vomited a couple of times. I got up, I was in the house along with the officers, and I'd go outside and get rid of what I had to get rid of, and then duck inside quick when I heard a shell coming. And the whole side of the house was all stone, and you could see it pockmarked where the shell fragments had hit it, but it didn't knock the thing down and didn't hurt it.
This was south of Rome, north of Rome. South of Rome?
This was what?
Was this south of Rome where you were, or north of
North
Rome?
of Rome.
North of Rome.
No. Oh, no, you're right. South of Rome. We hadn't taken Rome then,
Mm-hmm.
because we were the first convoy, or our convoy was the first that got into Naples Harbor. So we hadn't taken Rome.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, that was early then. That must have been September, or at the most October of 1943.
I don't remember.
Yeah, because Rome doesn't fall until June of 44 in the
Yes.
early part of the next summer.
Yeah. And after all, I only traveled about 50 miles from Naples to the front.
Mm-hmm. You were just intrigued by what the front was like. You
That's
just
right.
wanted to say you'd been there and see what it was like.
I wanted to see it, that's all.
Uh-huh.
How the boys reacted to it and
Mm-hmm.
so on. And of course I noticed that peculiar thing of the humor that arises from danger.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing stimulates a man to make a joke as when he's in trouble, when he's scared to death. Boy, the wit goes around, back and forth, funny sayings, and then of course you laugh at nearly anything.
I'm sure.
That was quite a trip. Now, on the way back, I rode with on a Jeep, and just with the driver. And halfway back, I remember the driver saying, "Do you ever shoot a rifle?" I said, "Oh, sure. Well, he said, "Hey, you better take this." And from the other side, he took this army gun and handed it to me, and he says, "Hang on to that." He said, we're bothered by snipers every once in a while on this trip." So you can believe me, I held the gun and I looked and looked as we went down, but we weren't. We didn't see anybody.
Thankfully.
No. Yes, I don't see how, well, we were moving. I suppose we weren't a good target either.
The ships that you sailed on carried almost all kinds of cargo. You mentioned the one ammunition ship that you were on, but I take it you were on a lot of different kinds of cargo.
Oh, yes. That Naples one was interesting. I was really scared on that one because we had a deck cargo that was stacked high with crates, and all the crates carried smoke bombs. If they'd ever been hit by a shell, if it had been so smoky, you wouldn't have had a chance. But we were never hit. We got sprayed with stones and concrete from bombs landing on the dock.
That's very close.
But they never hit us. They never bothered us. Oh, they bothered us. I remember the annoyance, too, when they were late. They came over every night. And normally they were regular. They'd come within 15 minutes of when you expected them.
The Germans had that kind of a reputation.
Yeah. Oh, they stuck to it. But every once in a while they'd be late. And that would drive us nearly crazy. Waiting for it. We always played poker in the officers' wardroom. And even the captain was there, everybody was there. But when they didn't come over on time, you didn't know what to do. And we curse and swear. What's the matter with them? What's the matter with them? No.
Can't trust them, eh?
No.
What was the quality of the officers that you served with? Were they in general a pretty capable group, or very mixed, or?
I think they were fairly good. I never had any feelings of superiority to them. I know that. The chief was worried about me because I spent too much in my cabin reading.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, the rest of them were all right. Let me see, I think I left something there, but
How many officers typically would be on a ship that you were on?
the chief, first, second, and third engineers. I think the captain, first mate, second, and third. I think that was it.
8 officers then, probably.
Yeah.
About. And a
And
crew.
then there was always the gun crew, but they were Navy people. And as far as I know, they only had one man.
Mhm.
They had one very sad thing happen. The Germans bringing back a load of prisoners. There were extra officers and extra men then, of course. They fixed toilets over the side. And you stepped up on a board and sat with your tail end hanging over the board, the bottom, and there were 2 railings there to hang on to. A prisoner came out at night. The sentry said halt, and the sentry said halt, and the boy walked on and pointed to the toilet. He was going to the side. And a damn American kid raised a gun and fired. What he did he blew the man's jaw off. There was no cause for it. The boy was just going to the toilet. He was unarmed. Couldn't do anything wrong. It was just one of those damn fool things. A new boy, he had said halt, and the guy didn't halt. And he shot. And I guess roughly that's what he'd been told to do.
Yeah, but he hadn't been in the business long enough to exercise any kind of discretion.
That's right. cruiser that was
Escorting the convoy.
that's right. And he had to come aboard in a breeches buoy, which is quite a trick, keeping keeping the rope tight enough to keep the guy from sinking down into the waves, and yet not pulling it hard enough to pull it apart. But we managed after a little while, and I don't know what the doctor could do for him, but he did his best. So that was the end of that.
Did you fairly frequently transfer prisoners back on the return run?
That was rare. It was a great thing coming back, of course. You had to hold your position in the convoy until the signal came releasing you. And I don't know, they were about 20, 30 miles maybe. Maybe less than that, I forget how far it was. But with the Shikshini, when we turned the fires full blast to give us full steam, of course there was a race. As soon as we got the signal, first man in got the best dock. That's all there was to it. And everybody would go as fast as possible. Well, we'd open up all the fires and we'd have everything ready. And we had you were still not supposed to get out a lot of smoke. So we had a small steam engine up, 2 or 3 flights above the engine room, near the stack, that would work a blower to blow air so that to cut down on the smoke when we opened up. And to get that thing started was an awful job because that's the only time we use it. And that was one of the chores I had to take care of. Another time, I know I impressed the chief, but it never occurred to me until afterwards that I was impressing him. And he was looking after, we had a large hole, astern, refrigerated, and we carried a vast quantity of meat over. And something went wrong. I never knew what was the matter with it, but I found the chief working by himself, doing something to the refrigeration engine. And I forget what it was. I forget what we were doing. But the place was full of chlorine, or whatever that stuff is. Was it ammonia?
Ammonia, fluorine, maybe.
Ammonia with more.
Yeah, ammonia was what they used.
Yeah. You could hardly breathe, and he could only breathe for a little while. Then he had to run out and take a breath. And he told me what to do, and I would run in, and I'd do what I could, as long as I could stand the stench of ammonia, and then I'd run out and he'd run in, and we did that, and I was our third assistant, and he hadn't asked me to. I saw he was in trouble, and I liked him, and natural things to help him. But it impressed him tremendously, and he couldn't do enough for me after that. Fortunately, he lived in, where is that place they have a race in Florida on the beach? cars. Speed.
Daytona?
Daytona.
Daytona.
He lived in Daytona. Always wanted me to move down there. I went that movie. I lived in New Jersey and I was happy. But unfortunately, on one trip, they had left some meat in the refrigerating department, in the refrigerating tank, and the chief, we were short. We were on one-day rations. We got bacon for breakfast, and that's all the meat we got. And so the chief got us a little meat, which belonged to the government, and somebody turned him in. There was hell to pay. Just the end of I never saw him again. Another time, I saw him and was never so pleased to see anybody in all my life. We were in America. We had one hole. It was a small hole, but it was tight, and normally we carried oil in it. We were notified on our way home to clean that tank out. We were not going to carry oil in it any further. So various steam lines were run in there, and it was steamed down to run all the oil, this god-awful gooey black oil that bunker 2 they called it. And of course they opened the drain lines. When they got through with it, just as we docked, they sent an oil around to close the lines. And apparently the damn fool didn't close the drain lines. Well, we were lightly loaded, of course, and it didn't make a particle of difference. And the chief went ashore. I was the only engineer aboard. And the government started putting ammunition in that tank. As the ship went down, the water, of course, backed up through the drains that had been left open, and finally got so the Army could see it. Well, immediately, the harbor people wanted to know to the last detail how such a thing could happen, and they started unloading all the ammunition. I no sooner got I was the only person questioned, of course. I was the engineer. So as soon as I got rid of the harbor people, the Navy came in. It was their ammunition. And they wanted to know, and they were much more particular about it, of how such a thing could happen. Well, the way it could happen was the way I'm sure to this day that it did happen. Nobody thought that out. Nobody left those drains open purposely. They just forgot to close them, that's all. When the Navy finally got through, and that was several days, of questioning. They'd come early in the morning and question me until night. Time out to eat. Well, then the FBI came in, and they went to work on me, and by this time, I was nearly crazy. And we had I got the captain to send for the chief to come back, for heaven's sake, never mind that he had time off and so on. And when he was due to come, I remember excusing myself to the FBI and telling them, now look, the chief engineer will be here. He'll answer all your questions. He'll tell you exactly what happened. God knows I had told them exactly what happened. It was easy to tell. It wasn't as though it was complicated. I went up on deck and I stood at the head of the gangplank and looked down. I could see a long way down I should see the chief coming, and finally I saw him coming, and I ran back and got my duffel bag and took it up and stood it right by the gateway. As soon as the chief stepped aboard, I said, "It's all yours, chief," and I stepped on the gangplank and I left. God, the chief cursed me out when I came back for that. He said, "You left me with that gang." And I said, I had taken care of that gang for days on end. I was sick and tired of it, saying the same thing over and over and over again. God, it was brutal. Oh, we got through with that.
Did the crews that you had generally, were they pretty good, or?
Yes, they were pretty good. As far as I knew, I only had anything to do with the black gang, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But they were normal as ruby pie. Most of them had a great deal of experience. I always arranged it to, when I got to be first engineer, I always arranged it so that the union representative was on my watch, so that I got the news of any trouble brewing in that direction. We never had it.
Didn't have any trouble, or?
No, they were all right.
How often did you get back to the States? How long would a typical trip be?
The trips were very, very varied. It all depends where you went. Mm-hmm. When we were running the African run going down around Cape Horn, it took a long time. Took a long time going, took a long time coming back. And we stopped in ports long enough to unload. Mm-hmm. Jeannie would have a better idea of how long the trips were.
But sometime it might be a matter of months before you got back?
Oh, yes, definitely. In fact, I don't think it would ever be less than a couple of months.
Mm-hmm. Were you on the North Atlantic run too, or
yes.
was?
Oh, yes. Well, I described parking in the Thames River.
Yes.
That was when the buzz bombs came over. Mm-hmm. Then another time we docked in Troy. Troy's in the south of England.
Don't know where that is.
An awful nice place, a lovely place. They had an awful job getting us in. The harbor isn't very big. But they got us in, and we unloaded there, and I walked through the countryside. I loved it. The stone bridges, always in a curve. And I don't know, it was so peaceful, it was so nice.
You told me you had been born in England.
Yes,
Is that right?
that's
And
right.
you came to the United States at what age?
I must have been about 11.
I see. So you had
Well,
memories of England that.
Oh, yes. It was the beginning of the First World War.
Uh-huh.
My father was in America, and mother and all the kids. I had 4 brothers, incidentally. They're all dead now. 2 of them were older than me and 2 younger. He came with us, for heaven's sake, to take this first ship out, Holland American Line, who were not bothered, and we had huge signs saying Holland American Line on either side of the ship. And the exciting part was there was supposed to be, and there was, a spy aboard who was running away, was probably spotted, his cover was blown, and we were stopped by an English cruiser, and they sent a boarding party aboard and chased this poor guy down, took him away. But that was very exciting.
I'm sure.
We loved every second of it. We were not in danger at all. We took any danger from submarines very lightly. Probably our parents didn't.
Did you have, during the Second World War, did you have frequent encounters with submarines, or was that relatively rare?
We had, it was relatively rare, but when depth charge goes off, it's quite something when you're below. It hits the side of the ship, and of course they're iron, and they ring. It's like no drum ever sounded live. You always look for leaks right away to see if it opened any seams. It never did. Or at least I always looked for them. I couldn't believe anything could make that much noise without doing some damage. And how the submarines lived through it, I'll never know. They must have been much closer than we were.
Some of them didn't, of course.
Yes, some few.
You didn't see any submarines on the surface at any time, or?
No. We saw the ship next to us sink from a submarine attack. But there again, so much noise from depth charges being flipped in every direction. I don't know. And
You didn't have depth charges on board, did you? They would be on
No.
the destroyers and the escort
That's right.
vessels. Yeah.
we had guns.
Guns.
We had 20 millimeters, lots of them. 3 or 4 to a side. And then there was a gun, I really don't know its power, but it was a big gun. Had heavy shells, I know, not so long. Was on the stern. And that's where I delighted myself by making a fool of myself. It did make me laugh. It was so stupid. It was when we were anchored in Naples Harbor. The whole rear deck, as I told you, was a mass of crates, and they had built a catwalk over the top of them that you could get to the gun in the rear and in the stern. Use more nautical terms. I was not on watch, and the poker game didn't interest me that night. I went below to see how the fireman was getting along. I thought maybe he'd like somebody to talk to. But he was practically asleep. He just had to keep the fires going. And he was happy enough, so I came up and I thought, jeepers, maybe I could hand ammunition because they were firing off the rear gun. My description of what went on there at night, the night sky, of all the tracers and things, was not exaggerated at all. It was a picture. And I got walking across the catwalk, and I got about halfway across, or a little more, and I suddenly found that I was walking like this, with my chin right down on my chest. And I pulled it up, and I thought, what the hell's the matter with me? There was no point in chucking my head down like that. And it occurred to me that probably it's a natural reaction to cover the throat, which is the most vulnerable spot. But I threw my head up in the air and straightened my shoulders and walked aft and hit my head on the gun turret. It damn nearly knocked me out. I hit it an awful smack. I couldn't laugh for a little while, but I knew how stupid the whole thing was. It really amused me. But not at the moment. That really
I'm
hurt.
sure not then.
No. Yeah.
Did you make it on the Murmansk run over to the Soviet Union to the north or not?
Oh, thank God.
That was a good one to stay away from
Yes,
everything I've heard.
They paid extra for it.
I'm not surprised.
It was that bad. So few ships got through, and the water was so cold. If you got in the water, you were gone. One thing I have got a souvenir from Naples. Some ships apparently were not worth hauling away from. They were at unused docks, and they were. The Navy was in the way of blowing them up. And I went aboard the one nearest us and looked her over and saw the ship's bell that I wanted. And I remember it came up, and the iron rod it was hung on curved over like that and hung the bell down here. And I went back and I got a hacksaw. I figured I could cut through that. And the Navy got to kidding me, but they did it very well. Was saying, you've got 10 minutes more, and then we're going to let her go. I didn't think they'd blow me up. They went that rough. But I worked, and it was hot. Naples is a far south port, and I sweat. And that was stainless steel, that damn rod, which is hellish stuff to cut. It's not like iron, it's not like ordinary steel. It's stainless steel, and it's the worst there is to cut. And I sweat, and I cursed, and I finally, I said, look, I've got to quit. I've got to get a new hacksaw blade. And I ran all the way from their ship down onto the dock, up the side into our ship, got a handful. I got 2 or 3 hacksaw blades and rushed back, changed the blade, sawed like mad. And they kept, every once in a while, they hurry up on that, hurry up, we haven't got all day. I tell you, I nearly went crazy. I still got the bell. I got it. They let me have it. But, boy, they made me work for it. But they probably enjoyed it very much.
The relations between the Merchant Marine and the Navy were generally good or acrimonious, or?
Generally good as far as I know. my contact with the Navy was excellent.
I remember reading reports from destroyer captains and people who run convoys for the Navy complaining about merchant captains not keeping station and drifting off one way or another, and angry signals going back and forth and keeping
I
up.
don't doubt that was true.
Yeah, of course you were down. You weren't standing bridge watches.
That's right.
You were.
Once we got a hot bearing, and while I was on watch, and I called the bridge and said, we got to slow down. And he said, we have not got to slow down under any circumstances. And I turned to the oiler whose business it was, and I said, you get buckets of water, and you keep throwing them on that until it cools. And we didn't slow down.
And you cooled it down with water?
That's right. Then got oil on it. And that was on the boat that the chief didn't like me. Next day he called me to his stateroom. Said, well, what caused that? What was the cause of it last night? I said, normal thing. You didn't get enough oil. He said, yeah, that's right. Didn't get enough oil. That's normal, huh? I said, well, no, it's not normal. It was always unfriendly.
This is an addendum to the story about the time in New York when Bob had pneumonia that his wife Jeannie told my wife Joanne. Go ahead, Joanne.
Okay. Well, I was sitting in the living room talking with Jeannie, and she heard Bob over telling the story to you, and she says, oh, I'm not sure he's getting that story right. So, as Jeannie told it, she was meeting Bob in New York at the Biltmore Hotel for the weekend, and he was coming down from Connecticut while he was getting his training from the Merchant Marines there at the, is it the Coast Guard Academy? At the Coast Guard Academy, I believe, in New London. And she met him there at the Biltmore, and they checked in, and he said to her just immediately that he was feeling very ill, and he really was quite sick, and she just became very concerned about him right away. And so she called the back at, where? New London?
New London.
She called back at New London at the base there to tell them what was wrong. And they said that, that any time one of the men was off the base, that their medical problems were the individual's responsibility. And of course, Jeannie and Bob did not have any money with them to go to a hospital. Jeannie said she just had enough money along to pay the hotel bill. And so then she said to the person that she was talking with, well, he couldn't have gotten pneumonia since he's been in New York. He's only been here 2 hours, and he was sick when he got here, and I'm sure he was sick before he left. But they didn't listen to her, and she said it was a typical kind of military bureaucracy that they didn't pay any attention to her. So she called a young friend of hers who happened to work for the Red Cross there in New York and talked to the friend, and she said it really was just kind of a coincidence. She talked to the friend and was saying, oh my, what am I to do? I must find some kind of hospital to get him, and he's just very ill. And so she said, the friend said, well, that she would, see what she could do and would call around. And she said within, I think it was less than a half an hour or an hour at most, the friend called back and said that an ambulance would be coming to pick Bob up and would take him to the Naval Hospital. Did he tell you where it was?
No, he didn't.
She did tell me. Maybe out on Long Island, I think. There was a naval hospital there. And Jeannie was not sure if the Red Cross was responsible for this, and I surmise that they were, because I know currently the Red Cross does all kinds of things for military personnel, and I think they were essentially doing the same thing during World War II. And she said the nicest thing happened, just kind of an aftermath to this. She said, so the ambulance came and picked Bob up and took him out there. And of course, Jeannie was blind at the time. And when it was time to check out then, and Bob had left, and of course he had some money also, but she didn't have enough money to pay the hotel bill. She only had $9. And so she told the people her dilemma, and they said, oh, that would be just fine, that she could just send them a check for the bill, which she did after she got back home in New Jersey. And that was the end of the story. She didn't tell me anything more about how he came along with his, he was in the hospital for 3 weeks with pneumonia, she said. Yes, she did tell me that.